Gen Xers. Sorry. Sorry. Okay, what are the influences? Now you'll see, just think of baby boomers optimistic. Now listen. Influences on Gen Xers. The Challenger explosion. How many Gen Xers in the room remember the Challenger explosion as a major issue in your generation? Okay. Another one, another real positive one, AIDS. Corporate downsizing. Your parents were losing their jobs. Okay. Not only were your parents losing their jobs, but your parents were losing their jobs in organizations that were thought to be extremely secure. And why would this be happening? So they're losing their jobs from Lockheed and McDonnell Douglas and Boeing. And, and these are jobs that everybody expected to last forever. But good benefits, good salary. This is going to last forever. And all of a sudden, they're out of jobs. And so that really affected the generation. The tripling of the divorce rate. Latchkey kids was coined during the Gen X time period. On the positives, on the more neutral side, we have the advent of video games, MTV, and computers became a very commonplace in households during the Gen X upbringing. Gen Xers, their characteristics, they tend to be skeptical, independent, resourceful, and informal. Now, where does this skeptical, well, the skeptical really comes from this whole issue around security and watching parents go through divorce and watching parents go through job changes that weren't by choice. And this whole idea of security started breaking down. So they said, that's never going to happen to me. I'm going to be independent. I'm going to do my own thing. The other thing and resourceful. The other thing that happened was many children who are Gen Xers grew up in, and by the way, this is all generalization. It doesn't apply to everybody, okay? But many of the Gen Xers grew up in single-family homes because of divorce. And so the parents would be coming home late in the afternoon or in the early evening. The kids had been home already from school. And the kids are popping the stuff and popping dinner into the microwave. And when mom or dad comes home, it's ready, right? I mean, we're on the table here. And so the Gen Xers tend to be, as kids, they tended to be very independent and resourceful. They took on different kinds of roles in the family because they had to. Their values are mobility. Oh, God, sorry. Their values are mobility and autonomy. They are very involved in balance between life and work life. They're really into balance. They're into technology. Rewards for results. Their idea is, if I do something good, reward me and give it to me now. I don't want delayed gratifications. I'm not like the traditionalists that say that I have to earn my rewards and I have to wait for them. And then skill development is really important to Gen Xers. All right, millennials, you're waiting. 1982 to 2000. By the way, these years that are being utilized, at Interchange Group, we look at about 18-year spans. In general, when you talk to theorists in generational issues, they use a 20-year span. Theorists fight over these things. It doesn't really matter to us. I mean, they're ballparks. If you're born in 1981 or 1982 or 1983 or 1980, you probably will have slightly different feelings about whether you fit better with millennials or better with Gen Xers. My nephew is on the cusp of a Gen Xer and millennial, and it's really interesting because one of my nephews, because he sometimes acts very much like a millennial and sometimes he acts very much like a Gen Xer. It's really interesting. He's a bit schizophrenic, but I don't tell him that. But if you were born on the cusp, you may say, hey, what generation am I really part of? Or you may be part of both. And so we do see those kinds of things. So millennials, what were the influences on you, or what have been the influences on you? And I think they're continuing to have some influences. The Iraq Wars, Desert Storm, and I don't know whatever we're calling this one. Okay? The Iraq Wars clearly have a big impact. 9/11 has a huge impact on you. Columbine, the idea that you can go to school and be shot. So safety issues are really germane to the millennial and security. And your parents probably are very concerned about those kinds of things and have drilled it into you. The girl movement was during the millennials. Girl sports, girl opportunities. It really kind of leveled the playing field a bit more in the millennial generation. Also, information technology is very strong, obviously, the iPhone. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, the utilization of those kind of tools constantly, far more than the Gen Xer, and far more than any other generation, except maybe the generation that's coming in behind you. Also, another influence is the first African American president, which the millennials had a big part in making happen. So those are the influences. The characteristics: you tend to be optimistic, confident, very confident. You're multitaskers, which I have an issue with, but you are multitaskers. And you're civic-minded. So you're quite different than some of the traits of the Gen Xers. Values are you constantly want feedback. You're team players. You're into teamwork and collaboration. Diversity is something that you just take for granted. Very different than baby boomers and traditionalists. One of the things, I have two millennials that sort of live in my house, not full time. I have a 26-year-old son and a almost 22-year-old daughter who's a senior in college. So we have millennial hormones in our house. And I'm not saying that in a negative way at all. But diversity, one of the things that is very striking to me as a baby boomer is diversity issues have changed. And I also do training in diversity. And the kind of training we did in diversity 10 years ago is very different than the kind of training we do in diversity today. And millennials are about as colorblind as I've ever seen a generation. A lot of mixed race, a lot of, my son has friends who are in every nationality and every religion, my daughter also. And it's just kind of interesting and fun to watch. And I'm pretty open-minded about that stuff, so I see it as a good thing, not as a bad thing. And finally, morality and civic duty is important to millennials, which thank God, because there's certainly enough of that needed. Okay, so how do you communicate with each other? How do the generations communicate with each other? And just to give you some heads up on this, we call it, at Interchange Group, we call it the communication of doors. And so it will make sense in a second. If you're a traditionalist, or if you have a boss that's a traditionalist, or you're interacting with a traditionalist, on the door of a traditionalist is schedule an appointment. All right? They're more formal. They're interested in talking, but they don't want to be interrupted. They want it to be more formal. The motivation for work for traditionalists are they're interested right now in today's environment. They're interested in mentoring. They're interested in creating a legacy for themselves. They are defining what their life has been about for themselves, and they're using the current workplace to help them do that. Right now in the workplace, most of them are not full-time workers. My father-in-law considers himself a full-time worker. He owns a business, and he's in that business, but he's only there 3 days a week. He makes full-time salary, but he only works 3 days a week. Good for him. I think it's great, actually. I do. I really do think it's great. So one of the things about traditionalists in the workplace is they're adjusting their schedules. They're not coming in 8 to 5. They're adjusting their schedules. They're doing project work. And probably in the arts, you'll see this a lot more from the point of view of project work, adjusted schedules. No, I don't want to come in that day, but if you want to meet me on this day, they'll be negotiating their time. If you're interacting with traditionalists, you have to be aware that they expect things to be a little bit more formal. The formalities are going to be important to them. Please, thank you, excuse me. Those are going to be. By the way, I'm sorry, I want to go back. One of the things, and I'll touch on this again, with millennials is the boundary issues, okay? There's very different boundary issues with millennials than there are with any of the other generations. And please do not understand that when I'm saying these things, I'm not putting judgments on it. It's just characteristics. These are just things we see. You know, so if you're a millennial and you're interacting with a traditionalist, or a traditionalist is mentoring you, for you to be successful with that traditionalist, it's probably going to be important for you to be able to formalize yourself a little bit, to understand that the traditionalist wants to know, when are we going to have that conversation? You know, what time, what day? Because I know millennials are so good at planning. Planning ahead, of course. You know, so in order to be successful with a traditionalist, you're going to need to conform to some extent to those things because it's going to make for a better collaboration. And so the other thing that the traditionalists will expect, and I'm a little guilty of this too, but I'm learning, they want hard copies. We like to kill trees. You know, traditionalists like hard copy. My wife, you know, I have learned, I wrote a book with a Gen Xer, and he kept sending me these big files, chapters of our book to review, and I would print them out. You know, and I'd read them in print. And he would say, "Why are you printing it out?" And I said, "Well, didn't you want me to read it? Can't you read it on your screen?" I said, "I can, but it doesn't feel right. You know, it just doesn't feel right." Well, I've since learned to not print out because I don't want to kill too many trees. But it's a struggle. And I'm a baby boomer, so just imagine the struggle that traditionalists have to transfer over that kind of stuff. So you guys might laugh at us, but it's a real problem for us. And I hope you know, there are enough trees left for us to keep printing out. But if you're going to be doing written communication with a traditionalist, the chances are that they're not going to see it as really very valid or very valuable to them unless you give it to them in a hard copy. Okay? An email probably isn't going to work for them. My father-in-law doesn't even know how to get on his email. He needs a secretary to do that. You know, so my mother-in-law calls me all the time and says, "So how do I make an attachment? I see the attachment. I see that paper clip up there, but what does that do?" Over and over again. So, and she asks my wife, and my wife says, "Ask Bob." So, or ask Sean or Rachel, my kids. So you know, that's what really drives traditionalists. They tend to have authoritative relationships. They want to see themselves as the authority, and in many relationships with traditionalists, they are the authority. And so the other thing is dress. I had a hard time figuring out what I was going to wear today. My wife says, "Well, aren't you wearing a suit?" Because I always wear a suit to presentations. And I said, "I'm talking to young people. They're going to look at me and say, 'What's going on with this guy? He's wearing a suit.'" But now that I saw someone else wear a suit too. But I didn't wear a suit today. But I didn't wear blue jeans either because that wouldn't be credible because you'd be thinking that I'm trying to be like you. So, you know, yeah. I understand. In the LA group, so you are talking. No, absolutely. No, I understand that. But I also know that most of the people in this room are Gen Xers and millennials. And so I am trying to speak to the professional equity issues that are going to arise for working with each other. And no, I understand that. And it's people. It's all people. So when we talk about professional attire or work, traditionalists really like more formal workwear. You will see traditionalists in the workplace wearing suits and ties because that's what they were told to do.